Hi, this is Bharti and we are here at KubeCon in San Diego, and today we have with us once again Dirk Hohndel. You are VP and Chief Open Source Officer at VMware. Thanks for being on the show once again.
Thanks for having me.
I'm curious, what is your pet peeve this time?
Oh, my pet peeves are many and they're somewhat consistent. So I think a lot about the software supply chain as we use it in the open source ecosystem. And so this morning at the keynotes, one of the things that I noticed was speakers focusing on security and privacy and safety and all that. And then the next command on their slide reliably is Docker run some binary that I download from the internet. And those two things, they seem to be a little bit at odds with each other. But the more I think about this, the more it's clear that this is not just a cloud native Docker problem, but throughout the modern app development environments, whether it's JavaScript, NPM, or whether it's PyPy or Ruby Gems, or wherever you look, even Homebrew on the Mac. Today, when I started with all this, you would download the sources, compile the sources, so you had the corresponding sources to what you were running. Today, most everything just gets downloaded as a bottle. So you get binaries that you hope and think were built from the sources that you have access to. But if a malevolent player gets access to the backend, they can start inserting any random binary code onto your system with little control. So this overall question of how can we as an industry pay more attention to our supply chain is something that is more and more important to me, and that I'm trying to get more people to interested in.
Yeah, because we have talked about it a couple of times. It was not about security, it also is about compliance also, that could become a serious issue at some point. But are you seeing any change? Because it seems more like education and awareness problem than a technical problem. Or is it both?
Well, it's kind of both. So there are huge advantages to just running a binary instead of having to build everything from sources. Because the first question you always ask yourself is, where do you start trusting? So do you start trusting with, okay, the upstream OS image? That seems like a reasonable place to start, because if you don't trust Ubuntu, or you don't trust Red Hat or Windows for that matter, or Apple, then it's a lost cause, right? But then where is the edge of where you stop trusting? So this is a challenging problem. And if you want to be flexible and be quick in your turnaround and be able to cycle very quickly through new development releases, through new product releases, you have to be able to reuse some binaries. So it is a technical problem in that I'm asking, wouldn't it be nice if we had a way to sign these binaries and had an on-the-fly verification mechanism of these signatures that allows us to say, yes, I trust this. Now, people will say, oh, we have that today. You, of course, can sign your binary. But now I'm trusting, again, Joe, random user that I've never met and that I don't know who they are. And the question becomes, is there a way for us as a community to devise a system of trust where we say, if it is signed with a key that is in this network of trust, then we trust it, and have the ability to reliably go back to the sources and do an audit. So today, if I run a random Docker binary, I have no way to actually go back to the underlying sources and say, oh, this is the code that I'm running.
If you look at, Linux, desktop Linux in a word, they kind of solve this problem, with the repositories and all those things. But then they also embrace Flatpack and Snaps. So did they mitigate this issue, or this issue is there as well in that model?
So I think we see a cycle that is repeating itself. We had initially when Linux started, people were building mostly from source. You had a few packages that you got as binaries, and then everything else you built yourself. And Gen 2 still does that today, right? And then you had the distributors come in, and they created this very, very well done supply chain. So if you want to get a package into Debian and have it signed with the Debian distribution keys, there is a lot of work going on to ensure that this is really the software that should be in the distribution. So you had this supply chain problem solved. But of course, that causes burden, that causes work. And then as the logical next step, people try to make it simpler because we keep trading off correctness and security for speed. So Snap or Flatpack or app images are a wonderful way to very quickly get an application for your Linux desktop. But now you have a new signing authority. Now you have somebody else whom you trust. Now you insert somebody else into your supply chain. And NPM and PyPy and Ruby Gems and Docker and all these other repositories create that same problem all over again. I think the bigger problem here that we need to solve is how can we ensure that in each of these various sources, we have a way to trust and to verify what we trusted in the first place. So how can we go back to the sources? And I see more and more of these repositories pop up. We see more sources of, that's a bad term, we see more and more repositories of binaries that pop up that people use directly without knowing what are the access controls to who can put binaries there.
I mean, you have been talking about it for a while, but do you see any momentum within the community where some actual efforts are going on? It's going beyond talk and, you know.
So for example, in the PyPy community, there is an active improvement request where there's discussion on how can we make this actually work better? How can we create a mechanism to verify what is available through PyPy? The NPM community has been trying to crack down on how you secure your accounts. So if you get to publish on NPM, making sure people have two-factor authentication. There's work being done, but I think the amount of software that today is stored in these repositories and the frequency with which it is updated and the frequency with which new ones pop up makes this a really challenging problem, and a problem I think that the industry is not looking at enough.
Right. And it's like complicated problem also. They're like, you know, people are getting things from different sources, so it's just not an easy problem to solve.
It's a very, very complicated problem to solve. And and this is one of those situations where you look at Apple or at Microsoft and you look at their monolithic structures and you say, oh, this is an advantage of a monolithic structure where you have a single entity that controls top to bottom, has the signing keys and can exert a lot more control. But then of course you go to the App Store and you see billions of applications and you ask yourself, so how much review, how much inspection is there, and how easy would it be to sneak things in? And we have the cases of malware applications in the app stores. You see this every few weeks. So there is no simple solution, and our distributed nature, which is a major strength of what we're doing in open source, at the same time makes it harder for us to solve that problem.
But that problem with that monolithic is also that, you know, they become the gatekeeper, and then they also get to decide which application can get into it or not. So that is also you don't want.
But so one of the things that VMware is doing, we acquired last year Bitnami, and we are trying to create this idea of a marketplace where you have a trusted middleman, in this case VMware Bitnami, that curates applications and has known good container images that are signed by us and that you can then rely on. So we're trying first steps to address this. And I think you'll see more initiatives from us in various of these ecosystems where we are working with the upstream open source communities in raising awareness, but also in discussing technical solutions that will make it easier for the communities to solve the underlying problems.
Yeah, Bitnami is a good example because, you know, they distribute those applications where people can use. So yeah, you are the center of, you know. So is Bitnami, I mean, do they already have this kind of mechanism with Bitnami? Or
oh yes, so yeah, this is something that is in place today, but we are going to, I'm not trying to get into product announcements here, but we are certainly going to do more with this capability and use it more broadly in the overarching VMware Tanzu cloud native environment as well.
Anything else you want to cover or touch upon in terms of supply chain? Because first of all, it's a very complicated, as you mentioned, we are not going to get any answers, even here.
I think the biggest concern that I have here is that in the excitement about the next new thing and about the next new one click makes this or that happening, that we often ignore the underlying engineering discipline that we really need. And so to me, this is a very fundamental problem. Calling it the supply chain problem makes it easier to wrap your mind around it, but it's really a problem of how much abstraction, how much racing faster and faster and faster forces you in the end to let go of some of the underlying things that you really, really want. And in the past, the open source community has been very good about ensuring that quality of engineering and attention to detail and security and privacy were things that we all considered very important. And so I'm trying to make sure that we continue down this path and that we look at some of the decisions that we've made in the last 5 years and say, maybe we can redo this one and do better.
Since you mentioned that, in the early days open source, so that made me think about something that these days, a lot of commercialization of open source is happening. So, which also means that the companies come out and say, make it easy. Docker, the whole idea was just to make it easy to do everything. But that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is, how do you see the commercialization of open source? The way I see it, that, it is part of the fabric of human civilization, economy, Without that, nobody would be using where it's going to hurt today, No offense to Richard Stallman, but so my idea is that, how do you see commercialization of open source, good or bad?
So open source is an engineering methodology and it's a social experiment, right? Open source is all about people trusting each other, working with each other, collaborating across borders between companies, amongst competitors in ways that we didn't do before. And so open source breaks a lot of old boundaries and breaks down a lot of walls, and that's a good thing. But at the end, everyone needs to be able to feed their family. Everyone needs a paycheck. And from the early days of the Linux community, we always have been very, very welcoming to companies creating products and services around open source. And there has been, and there continues to be, different opinions between the people who would identify themselves more forcefully as free software people, who have more the ideology that proprietary software is something they don't like, versus the open source community that has, from the very beginning, been very friendly and very open and very inviting to commercial interests. Because in my mind and in the mind of a lot of people who pushed open source for the last 25 years, the participation of the industry players is what makes us better. Today, if you look at the statistics for the Linux kernel, for example, about 90% of the developers participating do that as their full-time job. And I had a wonderful lunch conversation with a young woman who came here on a diversity scholarship to attend this event, which I'm happy to say VMware sponsored. And it was very interesting to talk to her why she is switching careers, why she went from being in a more digital marketing role and she wants to become a developer, and how this environment where you have the ability to show your skill and to if you do the work, you will find a job. So this part of what the commercialization of open source has brought us, that engineers who engage in these projects then have a very easy path towards employment. I think that's a key value that we can only get if we embrace that commercialization.
Yeah, you don't have to work in free time at night and then second patch will come like 3 months later when you have free time again.
Well, tell me about that. I still maintain an open source project in my free time at night, and I know
so VMware
all about that.
For subsurface, it's all free?
No, strangely, subsurface is not part of my day job, even though I often wish it was.
But you are no longer maintainer, right? Somebody else.
I am the maintainer of subsurface. Oh, yes.
I thought you handed it over to someone else.
No, Linus handed it over to me.
Oh, okay, right. So he's smarter than me. You have to find somebody.
Did you just say that he is smarter than me?
I mean, if he's watching it, he'll make it happy.
No, I will say I enjoy this. This is to me a big part of what I find rewarding about my job, that it does give me enough space to do this in my spare time.
Right.
And being a developer and being an active open source contributor is really important for me to actually understand what's going on. I'm always worried about people who turn into people talking about a technology instead of being part of the people developing the technology. So I always try to actually run all these things at home. I have my mini lab where I have a couple of Intel NUCs running an ESXi cluster, running Kubernetes on top, playing with all of the projects that we engage in, installing our own open source projects, and occasionally cursing when things don't work the way I want them to work. So to me, it's really important to remain an active engineer and not just be an executive who talks numbers and writes PowerPoint slides.
I was talking to Rob Hirschfeld from Reckon yesterday, and he was saying that he was talking to a lot of CNCF people where they are coming up with some report. And one interesting thing was, I'm forgetting the exact phrase, but it was more or less like, which company here, is kind of like the best company in terms of open source, the people. So it came out of VMware, they send the most people. And is that true? What is happening at VMware when it comes to open source? What are you doing there?
I think we've been quite successful in the transformation of VMware over the last few years. We've done a lot of work over the last 3 years in engaging in a very meaningful manner in a lot of open source projects, and certainly cloud native. So what we hear for KubeCon is very much core to our business. So we have invested a lot in upstream development, in a lot of work around that, the typical, chopping wood, carrying water kind of activities, release management, infrastructure work, the various SIGs and the engagement there, a lot of behind the scenes work. And yes, we have a fairly substantial a group of people here. And then with the acquisition of Heptio and with the intent to acquire Pivotal, we have brought in and will be bringing in even more open source savvy people. So I think we are at this point one of the key enterprise open source software companies, and I'll be honest, that makes me very proud.
Yeah, and because VMware is like not a new company; it's been a very old company. It has an old culture.
About 20 years old.
Yeah. So it has. So I mean, was it a struggle, or a lot of open source work was already going on? Because it takes time for people who have been working inside a company for 20, 30 years.
I think you have the same structure in every software companies. You have people who are very deep in your proprietary products, and that's their life and that's what they focus on. And to them, open source is new. But you always have a lot of people who either in their spare time or even in their work at creating commercial software engage a lot with open source. And there is no commercial open source software product. There is no commercial software product today that doesn't have open source components in them. That's true for Microsoft, for Apple, for SAP, for Oracle, for all of them. And so we always had a strong group of engineers inside VMware that are very open source savvy. And when I came in 3.5 years ago, one of my key tasks was to make sure that we expand this and make this more visible to the outside, but also that we gave those people more space. We gave those people more opportunity, and we refocused some of our initiatives to not be inward focused, but to focus on what the community is already doing and doing it better. Kostadis will give a keynote this afternoon where he will talk a little bit about how the community has actually changed how VMware creates products. And I think this is a very interesting story to look at the way in which a company that certainly prized itself for its excellent proprietary software products can at the same time be one of the leading players in enterprise open source. So to me, this is a huge success story.
It's a classic example of open source, business model. Dirk, thank you so much for sitting down and talking to me again.
My pleasure.
And I'm sorry that we won't be seeing each other this year, but we'll see each other next year. Thank you.
Thank you.